Hello, this is the Goodly Christian Witch, and welcome to our video presentation on the summer solstice, midsummer. And we're going to sort of read from this book called 8 Sabbats for Witches by Janet and Stewart Farrar. And it's published by Phoenix Publishing, Incorporated. It says 8 Sabbats for Witches, and Rites for Birth, Marriage, and Death by Janet and Stewart Farrar, with illustrations by Stewart Farrar and photographs by Ian David and Stewart Farrar. And it looks like this was, the copyright is in, it looks like it's, 1981. Okay. This is dedicated. This book is dedicated. They dedicated it to a friend of theirs, and it says, "And ye shall meet and know and remember and love them again." That's a very nice sentiment. So we're going to, before we start, I'm going to just give you a little bit of information about Midsummer and Midsummer's Eve. First of all, we have the representations here of the god and the goddess, of course, in Jesus and Mary, Mother Mary, and Jesus, Lord Jesus, and Lady Mary, or Mother Mary. And we have an angel represented, and she has a sunflower, and sunflowers, of course, are very good representations for summer solstice, which is the longest day and the shortest night. And Midsummer's Eve, that happens the night before, is sort of made famous by that Shakespeare play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the whole point of that is that, and that the whole concept of Midsummer's Eve is that because it's the longest day and the shortest night, then your dreams are going to go into your reality and be able to sort of bleed through that membrane between the astral plane and the physical plane, or even planes above, even the mental and emotional and causal bodies and all those planes above too. And the better you know yourself, and the better you know how to proceed with trying to get the dreams you want into your reality, then that will be a very good type of ritual to learn how to do, and to learn how to have lucid dreams and that kind of thing. Now, the summer solstice, it happens sometimes on the 21st of June, and sometimes on the 24th, and some people celebrate on the 24th. But I mean, it happens in the astronomy, on specific days, and then people's celebrations are kind of right around that time. In some countries, like in Germany, sometimes it's celebrated on the 24th, sometimes in some years, and in America it might be celebrated on the 21st sometimes, or different places are going to have different celebrations. Let's see, I wrote some of this down. And also, St. John the Baptist's birthday is on the 24th. And also, Sweden celebrates Midsummer on June 22nd. Well, these are for 2019, which is when we're making this video. And it's the 21st in 2019 as we're making this video. But it's also, the 21st is St. Aloysius Gonzaga feast day. Okay, so you see there's a lot of Catholic and Anglican type holidays. Now, for Wiccans, it's summer solstice and midsummer. So again, we're going to read from this book in order to give you a very nice presentation of the summer solstice. So here in this book, it's chapter 7. It says Midsummer, 22nd June. The sun god significance of the Midsummer Sabbat is, literally, as clear as day. At the summer solstice, he is at his highest and brightest, and his day is at its longest. Witches naturally and rightly greet and honor him at the peak of his annual cycle, invoking him to, quote, put to flight the powers of darkness, unquote, and to bring fertility to the land. Midsummer is perhaps the most celebratory of the festivals, in the sense that it rejoices in the full flood of the year's abundance, the apogee of light and warmth. But the Sabbat cycle, even at the height of its joy, always takes into account what lies behind and before. As the ancient Greeks put it, I'll just translate it here, because I don't read Greek very well. Everything flows, nothing is static. So the quote is, everything flows and nothing is static. Life is a process, not a state, and the witches' Sabbats are essentially a means of putting oneself in tune with that process. So at midsummer, the process aspect is reflected in the other god theme, that of the Oak King and the Holly King. And indeed, Holly King and all of that is where you get Hollywood from, and those kinds of things. At midsummer, that was an aside by me, excuse me, so I'll just start from the book again. So at midsummer, the process aspect is reflected in the other god theme, that of the Oak King and Holly King. At midsummer, the Oak King, god of the waxing year, falls to the Holly King, his twin, the god of the waning year, because the blazing peak of summer is also, by its very nature, the beginning of the Holly King's reign, with its inexorable progression to the dark nadir of midwinter, when he in turn will die at the hands of the reborn Oak King. The Oak King's midsummer death has taken many forms in mythology. He was buried alive, or blinded with a mistletoe stake, or crucified on a T-shaped cross. And in ancient times, the human enactor of the Oak King was thus sacrificed in actuality. His death was followed by a 7-day wake, but the Oak King himself, as god of the waxing year, withdrew to the circumpolar stars, the Corona Borealis, the Celtic Care, Arian Harad, don't think I pronounced that right, Arian Harad, that turning wheel of the heavens, which the ancient Egyptians called Ikemsek, not knowing destruction, because its stars never dip below the horizon, even at midwinter. Here he awaited his equally inevitable rebirth. Robert Graves suggests that the biblical story of Samson, a folk hero of the Oak King type, reflects this pattern. For after being shorn of his power, he is blinded and sent to serve in a turning mill. One might also suggest that Delilah, who presides over his downfall, represents the goddess as death in life, and that in demoting her to villainous, Hebrew patriarchalism forgot or suppressed the sequel, that in due course, as life in death, she would be destined to preside over his restoration. Graves points out further that since in medieval practice, St. John the Baptist, who lost his head on St. John's Day, 24th June, took over the Oak King's title and customs, it was natural to let Jesus, as John's merciful successor, take over the Holly King. Of all the trees that are in the wood, The holly bears the crown. The identification of the Pacific Jesus with the holly or holly oak must be regretted as poetically inept, except insofar as he declared that he had come to bring not peace, but the sword. The White Goddess, page 180 to 181. Any significant midsummer Sabbath ritual must embrace both these god themes, for the solstice are key points on both. But what of the goddess? What is her role in the midsummer drama? The goddess, as we have pointed out, is unlike the god in that she never undergoes death and rebirth. In fact, she never changes. She merely presents different faces. At the winter solstice, she shows her life-in-death aspect through her earth body, though her earth body seems cold and still, yet she gives birth to the new sun god and presides over the replacement of Holly King by Oak King with his promise of resurgent life. At the summer solstice, she shows her death-in-life aspect. Her earth body is exuberantly fecund and sensuous, greeting her sun god consort at the zenith of his powers. Yet she knows it as a transient zenith, and at the same time she presides over the death of the Oak King and the enthronement of his dark but necessary and thus not evil twin. At midsummer the goddess dances her magnificent dance of life, but even as she dances, she whispers to us, Pantra Re Odin Mene. Midsummer is both a fire festival and a water festival, the fire being the god aspect and the water the goddess aspect, as the ritual should make clear. Midsummer is also sometimes called Beltane, because bonfires are lit as they are on May Eve. It has been suggested that St. Patrick was largely responsible for this in Ireland because he shifted Ireland's bonfire night to St. John's Eve to play down the pagan implications of May Eve. Continuing, he may indeed have shifted the emphasis, but he can hardly have shifted the name, because Beltane means May in Irish. The use of the name for midsummer can have arisen only in non-Gaelic speaking countries. In any case, Midsummer was a principal fire festival throughout Europe, and even among the Arabs and Berbers of North Africa, it was lesser and late developing in the Celtic countries because they were not originally or naturally solar-oriented. Many of the customs have survived into modern times and often involve the turning or rolling downhill of a flaming wheel as a solar symbol. As at Beltane and Samhain, indeed, at every festival, the bonfire itself has always been regarded as having great magical power. We have already mentioned under Beltane the custom of jumping the fire and driving cattle through it. Ashes from it were also scattered on the fields. In Ireland, a burnt sod from the St. John's Eve fire was a protective charm. In flax-growing countries, the height achieved in jumping the fire was believed to foretell the height to which the flax would grow. Moroccans rubbed a paste of the ashes into their hair to prevent baldness. Another custom widespread throughout Europe was to strengthen the eyes by looking at the fire through bunches of larkspur or other flowers held in the hand. Chapter 62 of Fraser's Golden Bough is a mine of information on fire festival traditions. For modern witches, fire is a central feature of the Midsummer Sabbat, as it is of Beltane. But since the cauldron, which on May Eve holds the Beltane fire, is used at midsummer for the water with which the high priestess sprinkles her coven, it is referred to as the Cauldron of Ceridwen, reaffirming its goddess symbolism. We have drawn on another long-standing tradition by suggesting twin bonfires for the midsummer rite, or twin candles as their equivalent if the festival is indoors. Magically, passing between them is regarded as the same as passing over a single fire. If you are driving cattle through as a spell for good milk yield, is obviously more practical. Of all the Sabbats, midsummer in temperate climates is the one to hold out of doors, if facilities and privacy permit. For sky-clad observance, it and Lugna may prove to be the only ones. But as with the other Sabbats, we have described our ritual as for indoor celebration, if only because adaptation of an indoor script to outdoor use is easier than the other way round. Talking of skyclad, one midsummer tradition may be of interest to any woman who is anxious to conceive and who owns a vegetable garden. She should walk through it naked on Midsummer Eve, and also pluck some St. John's wort, if there is any. If your vegetable garden is anything like ours, shoes might be thought a permissible modification of nakedness. This is an intriguing mirror image of the ancient and widespread fertility rite in which women walked naked round the fields to ensure an abundant harvest, often emphasizing their sympathetic magic by riding, a discreet euphemism, phallic broomsticks. See page 86 for a 20th century survival of this. The preparation. The cauldron is placed immediately in front of the altar with some water in it and decorated with flowers. A branch of heather is placed beside it, ready for the high priestess to sprinkle water with. Quite apart from this branch, heather is a good plant, symbolically, for circle decorations on this night. Red heather is the passionate flower of midsummer, and white heather represents the moderating influence, will controlling or directing passion. 2 crowns, one of oak leaves and one of holly leaves, are made and placed beside the altar. The high priest, who represents the sun god, should be crowned too, but from the start of the ritual, his crown should be gold-colored, and he may add any other accessories or decorations which enhance the solar symbolism. High priestess and maiden may wear chaplets of summer flowers. The 2 altar candles and their holders may be used at the appropriate moment as the bonfires, or 2 other candles in holders may be kept ready. Outdoors, of course, 2 small bonfires will be laid ready for quick lighting, one halfway between the center of the circle and the east candle, one halfway between the center and the west candle. The outdoor circle will, of course, be much larger, leaving room to dance between and around the bonfires. A dark-colored scarf is laid by the altar, ready to use as a blindfold. A number of straws are laid on the altar, as many as there are men at the Sabbat, except for the high priest. One of them is longer than the rest, and one shorter. If the high priestess, for her own reasons, decides to nominate the two kings instead of drawing lots for them, the straws are of course not needed. The ritual. After the witch's rune, the maiden fetches the straws from the altar and holds them in her hand so that all the ends are protruding separately, but nobody can see which are the short and long ones. The high priestess says, "Let the men draw lots." Each man, except the high priest, draws a straw from the maiden's hand and shows it to the high priestess. The high priestess points to the man who has drawn the long straw and says, "Thou art the oak king, god of the waxing year. Maiden, bring his crown." The maiden places the oak leaf crown on the head of the oak king. The high priestess points to the man who has drawn the short straw and says, "Thou art the holly king, god of the waning year. Maiden, bring his crown." The maiden places the holly leaf crown on the head of the holly king. The high priestess leads the oak king to the center of the circle, where he stands facing west. The rest of the coven surrounding him facing inwards, except for the high priestess and high priest, who stand with their backs to the altar on either side of the cauldron. The high priestess says, "With the sun god at the height of his power and majesty, the waxing of the year is accomplished and the reign of the oak king is ended. With the sun god at the height of his splendor, the waning of the year begins. The holly king must slay his brother, the oak king, and rule over my land until the depths of winter, when his brother shall be born again." The holly king moves in front of the oak king, facing him, and places his hands on the oak king's shoulders, pressing downwards. The oak king falls to his knees. Meanwhile, the maiden fetches the scarf, and she and the holly king blindfold the oak king. The rest of the coven move back to the perimeter of the circle and sit down facing inwards. The high priestess picks up her athame and moves forward. The holly king takes her place before the altar on the other side of the cauldron from the high priest. The high priestess, athame in hand, dances deosil around the kneeling oak king, while the high priest declaims the following poem, steadily and clearly emphasizing the beat and maintaining the rhythm. "Dance, lady, dance, on the oak king's tomb, where he lies half a year in thy quiet womb. Dance, lady, dance, at the holly king's birth, who has slain his twin for the love of earth. Dance, lady, dance, to the sun god's power, and his touch of gold on field and flower. Dance, lady, dance, with thy blade in hand, that shall summon the sun to bless thy land. Dance, lady, dance, in the silver wheel, where the oak king rests, his wounds to heal. Dance, lady, dance, for the holly king's reign, till his brother the oak shall raise again. Dance, lady, dance, in the moonlit sky, to the threefold name men know thee by. Dance, lady, dance, on the turning earth, for the birth that is death, and the death that is birth. Dance, lady, dance, to the sun on high, for his burning splendor too must die. Dance, lady, dance, to the year's long tide, for through all change must thou abide." And now, accelerating the rhythm, dance for the sun in glory, dance for the oak king's passing, dance for the holly king's triumph. Dance, lady, dance, dance, lady, dance, dance, lady, dance. The coven join in the chant, "Dance, lady, dance," to a fast insistent beat till the high priest signals to them to stop and also stops himself. The high priestess ends her dance by laying down her athame on the altar. She and the maiden help the Oak King to rise, and they lead him, still blindfold, to kneel before the west candle. The high priest then says, "The spirit of the Oak King is gone from us to rest in Caer Erenthod, the castle of the silver wheel, until with the turning of the year the season shall come when he shall return to rule again. The spirit is gone. Therefore let the man among us who has stood for that spirit be free from his task." The maiden removes the Oak King's blindfold, and the high priestess removes his oak leaf crown. They lay them on each side of the west candle and then help the man rise. He turns and again becomes a part of the coven. The high priest says, "Let the midsummer fire shine forth." The maiden and the Holly King fetch the 2 altar candles and place them on the east-west line, equidistant from the center and 4 or 5 feet apart. Meanwhile, the high priestess rejoins the high priest at the altar. Outdoors, maiden and Holly King light the 2 bonfires. The maiden then fetches the high priest's athame from the altar and stands beside the westerly midsummer candle facing east. The Holly King fetches the chalice of wine and stands beside the easterly midsummer candle facing west. The symbolic great rite is then enacted by the high priestess and high priest, the high priestess placing herself between the 2 candles, and the maiden and Holly King handing over the athame and chalice at the appropriate moment. After the great rite and the passing of the chalice, the high priest stands before the altar with the wand in his right hand and the scourge in his left, crossed over his breast in the Osiris position. The high priest faces him and invokes joyfully, "Great One of heaven, power of the sun, we invoke thee in thine ancient names, Michael, Balin, Arthur, Lug, come again as of old into this thy land. Lift up thy shining spear of light to protect us. Put to flight the powers of darkness. Give us fair woodlands and green fields, blossoming orchards and ripening corn. Bring us to stand upon thy hill of vision and show us the path to the lovely realms of the gods." She then traces the invoking pentagram of earth in front of the high priest with her right forefinger. The high priest raises both his hands high and then plunges the wand into the water in the cauldron. He then holds it up, saying, "The spear to the cauldron, the lance to the grail, spirit to flesh, man to woman, sun to earth." The high priest lays the wand and scourge down on the altar and joins the rest of the coven. The high priestess picks up the heather branch and stands by the cauldron. She says, "Dance ye before the cauldron of Caradwin, the goddess, and be ye blessed with the touch of this consecrated water, even as the sun, the Lord of life, ariseth in his strength in the sign of the waters of life." The coven, led by the high priest, start to move Deosil around the circle outside the 2 candles. As each person passes her, the high priestess sprinkles him or her with water and her heather branch. When she has sprinkled everybody, she joins the moving ring. The high priestess then orders everybody in turn, singly or in couples, to pass between the midsummer candles and to wish as they go. When everyone has been through, the high priestess and high priest pass through together. They then turn back and pick up the 2 candles and return them to the altar to leave room for the dance. High priestess and high priest then lead the coven in spontaneous and joyous dancing until the high priestess decides it is time for the party stage of the Sabbat. And that is the conclusion of that chapter and that ritual in this book, 8 Sabbats for Witches, by Janet and Stewart Farrar. Thank you. We're going to be giving you these types of rituals as these 8 Sabbats come about and read from this book. We think this is a very pleasant way to deal with trying to present and keep for all time these wonderful rituals and to honor this beautiful book and the people who wrote it. This is the Goodly Christian Witch. Good fortune to you.